The first thing I noticed was the empty chair. Not because it was empty. Guys miss ice fishing all the time. Truck won't start, kids got the flu, wife's in a mood. 7 years we'd been doing this. Every Saturday from late December through the end of March, out on Chequamegon Bay, in a plywood shack that smelled like propane, wet wool, and the kind of silence that 4 men earn after knowing each other long enough. You don't cancel on that lightly, but it happens. What made me set my beer down and look at the 2 faces still in that shack was the way neither of them would look back at me. It was January 18th. Saturday. About 9 in the morning, cold enough that the spit froze before it hit the ice if you were dumb enough to test it. Travis Kemp had texted the group at 6 a.m. Can't make it. Kim needs me home. No follow-up, no joke about owing us beer next week. Just that. Travis is my closest friend. Has been since he replumbed my shop 8 years ago and I rebuilt the rear axle on his work van in trade. He's a plumber, lives 2 houses down from Dwight Pollard on Cedar Lane, which will matter later, though I didn't know it then. Travis doesn't miss fishing. He came out the Saturday after his appendix burst, drove himself to the lake with the staples still in, and Kim nearly divorced him over it. So, Kim needs me home didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I cracked a joke when I pulled up a walleye. Decent one, maybe 3 pounds. Said something about Travis missing the only fish we'd caught all month. Craig Bauer smiled the way you smile at a funeral when someone tells an anecdote about the dead. Neil Osborne didn't smile at all. He just stared at the hole in the ice like it owed him money. Craig is an electrician. Good one. His wife Dana is Dwight Pollard's first cousin, which will also matter. Neil works for the Ashland Municipal Water Department. Quiet guy. The kind who doesn't say much but hears everything, like a truck engine idling. You forget it's running until you need it. We fished for another 2 hours. Caught nothing else. I drove home thinking it was just an off day. Everybody's entitled to one. The next Saturday, January 25th, Craig was gone too. His text came at 7 a.m. Family stuff. Sorry, brother. Now it was just me and Neil in that shack and 2 empty chairs where there should have been men. The propane heater kicked and hissed. Neil sat with his line in the water and said nothing for 45 minutes. I mean nothing. Not a word. Not a grunt. I've sat with quieter men. I did 2 tours in Iraq and shared a barracks with guys who could go a whole week on hand signals. But this was different. This was a man trying not to say something. I finally put my rod down. Neil, you want to tell me what's going on? He didn't look at me, kept staring at that hole in the ice like there was something important swimming just below the surface. Talk to your wife, Garrett. That's all I can say. Don't ask me again. I watched the side of his face for about 10 seconds. He never blinked. All right, I said. We packed up early, drove home in separate trucks. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was doing what it always does when something breaks, running diagnostics. That's how the Army trained me. When a system fails, you don't guess. You don't kick it and hope. You test each component one at a time until you isolate the fault. Then you fix it or you replace it. Talk to your wife. Not, your wife is cheating on you. Not, something happened. Talk to your wife. That's the language of a problem, not an accusation. Something Megan was involved in. Something my friends knew about but couldn't touch. I didn't know what it was yet. But I knew the shape of it. The way you can tell an engine's got a cracked head gasket before you even pull the valve cover just from the sound. I got home around noon. Tyler was on the couch playing a video game. Sophie was at the kitchen table drawing horses. Megan was folding laundry in the bedroom. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a moment. 12 years. We got married when she was 24 and I was 26, fresh off my second deployment, still tasting sand every time I ate something dry. She was the first thing that felt real in a world that had gone sideways. I loved her the way a man loves the ground after a rough landing, completely, and with the understanding that it could have gone the other way. Neil told me to talk to you, I said. Said something's going on. She didn't stop folding, didn't look up. Her hands just kept working. Crease, flatten, fold, stack. I have no idea what Neil's talking about. You know how he gets in winter. Seasonal thing or whatever? Clean answer, no hesitation. Either she was telling the truth or she'd been expecting the question. I went to my shop, called Travis. No answer, called again, nothing. Texted, pick up the phone, Travis. 3 minutes later, I can't, man. I'm sorry. Called Craig. He answered on the 5th ring, sounding like he was hiding in a closet. I found out later he was literally stepped away from a Sunday dinner at Dana's parents' house. Craig, what is going on? Long pause. The kind of pause that costs something. Then, Trav and I decided it's better to keep some distance. Not from you. From the situation. That's all I can say. What situation? I can't, Garrett. I'm sorry, I can't. He hung up. I sat in my shop for an hour after that. Didn't turn the lights on. Just sat on the stool next to the county snowplow I was rebuilding, the one with the blown turbo, and listened to the building settle in the cold. The metal walls ticked and pinged the way they do when the temperature drops. Outside, the wind came off Superior and hit the corrugated steel like a flat hand. Most men, I think, would have assumed the worst right then. Affair. My wife, somebody else. And yeah, that was in the back of my head. But Neil's words kept catching like a burr on fabric. Talk to your wife. If it was just sleeping around, Travis would have told me. He'd have hated every second of it, but he'd have done it, because that's what friends do. Instead, he ran. Craig ran. Both of them, men who'd sit with me in a blizzard on open ice, ran. That meant it was bigger than a guy in her bed. That meant it was something they couldn't touch without getting burned. I decided then. I wasn't going to ask again. I wasn't going to beg my friends for answers or pressure my wife into a lie she'd already rehearsed. I was going to watch. And when I understood the full picture, every moving part, every connection, every weakness in the system, I was going to act. I'm not a patient man by nature, but I'm a thorough one. And there's a difference between patience and discipline. Patience is waiting and hoping. Discipline is waiting and preparing. Week of January 27th. I started paying attention to things I'd been walking past for weeks. Megan had been coming home late on Wednesdays. She said it was end-of-quarter reporting. She works for Bayfield County Administration, Development Services Division. Permits, zoning, licensing. She's been there 9 years and she's good at it. Smart, organized, the kind of employee who actually reads the whole statute before she stamps an application. Wednesdays used to be her short day. She'd leave the office at 3, pick up Tyler and Sophie from school at 3:15, and be home by 3:30 with groceries and a plan for dinner. That was our rhythm, had been for years. But sometime around Christmas, she'd arranged for our neighbor Linda to grab the kids. When I asked Linda about it, kept it casual, just a, "Hey, thanks for doing that. How long's it been going on?" She said, "Oh, since right before Christmas, I think." She said her department got slammed. Before Christmas. That was 6 weeks. This wasn't new. Whatever was happening on Wednesdays, it had roots. February 5th. Wednesday. I told my shop assistant, Dean, that I had an errand. Left work at 5:30. Drove to the county administration building downtown. The building was mostly dark. Second floor, Megan's department. All the lights were off. But her white Subaru was in the parking lot. Front row, right where she always parked. I pulled into a spot across the street, killed the engine, and waited. 7 cars in the lot. Most I couldn't place. Could have been anyone from any department. But one I knew the way a surgeon knows his own hands because I'd rebuilt it. Silver Ram 3500 dually. Aftermarket running boards I'd bolted on myself. Custom exhaust I'd welded in my own shop. I didn't even need to check the plate. Dwight Pollard, general contractor. Owns Pollard Construction and Remodeling. 44 years old. Confident the way a golden retriever is confident. All tail wagging and open face until you realize he's already eaten your sandwich off the counter. Divorced once. His ex moved to Green Bay and won't return his calls. He lives on Cedar Lane, 2 houses from Travis Kemp. And 2 years ago, I personally rebuilt the transmission on that Silver Ram. Charged him a fair price. He shook my hand and called me a lifesaver. I sat for 40 minutes. Didn't turn on the heater because the exhaust would have been visible. The cold came through the floorboards and into my boots and up into my knees, and I sat there. At 6:22 p.m., the side exit opened. Megan came out first, then Dwight, a few steps behind. They didn't touch. They were careful, the way you're careful when you know someone might be watching, which tells you everything about what happens when nobody is. They walked to his truck. She got in the passenger side. They pulled out of the lot and turned south on Highway 13. Her Subaru stayed behind. Sitting there under the parking lot, light like a dog waiting for its owner. I drove home. Picked up my kids from Linda's. Made mac and cheese, the kind from the box, the orange kind Tyler likes. Helped him with long division while Sophie read to me from a book about a girl who lives on the moon. Then I read her a chapter of Hatchet because that's what we were working through, and she was at the part where the boy figures out how to make fire. I tucked them in, kissed their foreheads. Went downstairs and sat in the dark living room and listened to the house tick and settle around me. I wasn't calm because I felt nothing. I was calm because I knew that rage without a plan is just noise, an engine revving in neutral. Sounds impressive. Goes nowhere. The next morning I started digging, and what I found changed everything. Bayfield County is in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has open records laws that are about as wide open as a barn door in July. Every building permit, who filed it, when it was filed, when it was approved or denied, the property address, the contractor, the project value, all public record. You can pull it from the county's online portal in your underwear at 2 in the morning, and that's pretty much what I did. I set up a spreadsheet on my shop computer. Nothing fancy, just columns, contractor name, permit number, filing date, approval date, days elapsed. Pollard Construction. Previous calendar year. 4 permits filed, 4 approved, average turnaround about 3 weeks. Normal numbers for a small to mid-size outfit in a rural county. Current year, up to the first week of February. 13 permits. 13. Average approval time, 9 business days. For a county office that handles every permit in the region, residential, commercial, municipal, 9 days is not just fast. 9 days is someone walking your paperwork to the front of the line and stamping it while the ink is still wet. Then I looked at the competition. Espinoza General Contracting. Victor Espinoza, been in business 22 years. Good reputation, solid work. 3 permits issued, average wait 47 business days. 2 applications kicked back as incomplete. Tillman Renovations. Brenda Tillman, small residential outfit. A 1-woman operation with a couple of subs. 2 permits issued, average wait 51 days. 1 application lost and had to be resubmitted from scratch. Half a dozen other small contractors scattered around the county. Similar story. 2 months, 3 months, kicked back for missing documentation that wasn't actually missing. I'm not an educated man in the way that people mean when they say it. I didn't go to college. I went to Fort Benning, and then to Mosul, and then to a shop where I fix things that weigh more than most people's houses. But I can read numbers, and these numbers weren't subtle. Dwight's business didn't grow because he suddenly got better at contracting. It grew because everyone else was being strangled in a paper bag. And the hand on that bag belonged to the woman I'd been sleeping next to for 12 years. There was something else in those records, though. Something that didn't make sense at first. One of Dwight's 13 permits, project number 2024-CF-0847, was for a renovation of a lakefront cabin on Madeline Island. Nice property, assessed at about $200,000 with the land. The property owner listed on the permit wasn't a person. It was something called Northern Birch Holdings LLC. I didn't recognize the name. Filed it away in the back of my head, the way you file away a noise in an engine that doesn't match anything in the manual. Could be nothing. Could be the thing that matters most. Around that same time, I remembered something one of my shop clients had said to me a few months earlier. Guy named Pete, ran a small excavation outfit, came in to get a hydraulic cylinder repacked on his backhoe. He'd been griping while I worked. I don't know what's going on at the county, Garrett. Used to take 2 weeks to get a grading permit. Now it takes 2 months. Meanwhile, Pollard's crews are breaking ground on a new project every other week. How's he doing it? I'd shrugged at the time, didn't think much of it. Now it clicked into place like a socket on a bolt. The week after I found the permit data, I pieced together the rest. Why my friends had pulled away. I didn't need anyone to tell me. Once you know the shape of a thing, the details fill themselves in like water running downhill. Travis lives next door to Dwight. His wife Kim would have been the one to see Megan's car in Dwight's driveway on some Wednesday evening when Travis was still out on a late job. Kim would have told Travis, because that's what wives do when they see something that'll detonate a friendship. Travis, being Travis, a loyal man trapped in an impossible spot, would have told Craig, thinking maybe Craig could handle it through family. After all, Craig's wife Dana is Dwight's first cousin. Blood proximity, maybe a quieter path to a resolution. But Dana shut it down. I could almost hear the conversation. Stay out of it. Dwight's personal life is none of our business. Megan's a grown woman. And Craig, who loves me like a brother but goes home to Dana every night, was boxed in. If he tells me, Dana sees it as betraying her family. If he keeps quiet, he's betraying me. So they both did the only thing they could. They stopped coming to the shack. Because they couldn't sit across from me on the ice and lie, and they couldn't tell the truth without burning their own houses down. I didn't blame them. I still don't. They were in a box with no good exit. When I look at what they did, I see 2 men who cared enough about me that they couldn't stomach pretending everything was fine. That's not cowardice. That's a kind of decency that just looks like cowardice from the outside. But here's the part that turned my anger from something personal into something else entirely. While I was digging through Dwight's permits, I pulled the bid documents for a renovation of the community center's HVAC system. The community center on 3rd Street, where Tyler plays hockey, where I coach his team every Tuesday and Thursday, where Sophie had her birthday party last year. 3 contractors bid that job last fall. Dwight's bid was the highest of the 3, $38,000. The 2 lower bids were rejected for incomplete documentation. One of those rejected bidders was Victor Espinoza. Victor Espinoza, who'd been in business since before Dwight Pollard knew which end of a hammer to hold. Victor Espinoza, whose paperwork I would bet my shop was meticulous, because that's the kind of man he is, rejected for incomplete documentation. While Dwight waltzed in with the highest number and walked away with the contract. That was the moment it stopped being about my marriage. My marriage was already dead. I just hadn't signed the certificate yet. But this was something else. This was my town. My neighbors. People who worked honest jobs and played by the rules and got ground up because a contractor was sleeping with the woman who held the rubber stamp. I'm not a righteous man. I don't go to church. I don't give speeches about integrity. But I fix things for a living. And when I see a machine that's been sabotaged, something in me won't rest until it's running right again. I found the LLC's trail on a Tuesday night, February 18th. Wisconsin's Department of Financial Institutions has a public database. Free. Anyone can search it. Northern Birch Holdings was formed 8 months prior, which meant June of the previous year. The registered agent wasn't local. It was a law office in Duluth, Minnesota. It crossed the state line. That's an odd choice for a property on Madeline Island, which is about as Wisconsin as it gets. You use a Minnesota law office when you want distance. When you want a layer between the thing and the people who made the thing. The cabin itself had been purchased 6 months ago for $185,000. Currently being renovated by Pollard Construction under one of those 9-day magic permits. Wisconsin lets you keep LLC members anonymous in state filings. I couldn't see who owned Northern Birch just by searching the Wisconsin database. But the timeline told me plenty. The Wednesday pattern, Megan's late nights, started around November, best I could figure. The LLC was formed in June, 5 months before the affair was visible, which meant either the affair started earlier than I thought, or, and this was the possibility that sat in my stomach like a cold stone, Dwight had been working on Megan for months before anything physical happened. Cultivating her, flattering her, making her feel seen and valued and important, the way a man does when he wants something from a woman and he's patient enough to play the long game. Megan used to tell me she felt invisible, not in a dramatic way, just offhand comments. Nobody notices what I do at work. This town is so small, sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. I'd nod and say something useless like, I notice, and go back to my invoices. I'm not making excuses for what she did, but I'm not going to pretend I didn't leave a gap that a man like Dwight was built to walk through. The cabin could have been a lot of things. A shared investment, their little love nest being built with the profits of rigged permits. Or Dwight's project alone, flipping lakefront property with money he'd made off Megan's corruption. Either way, Megan wasn't just stepping out on me. She was co-signed on a scheme. I bought a fireproof lockbox from the hardware store that week. The heavy kind. The kind you bolt to the floor. Kept it in my shop, not at home. Printed everything. Every permit record. every search result, every timeline note I'd written. Put it all in the box and locked it. Megan walked through the shop that evening on her way to ask if I wanted dinner. Saw me closing the lockbox. "What's that for?" "Insurance papers," I said. "Dean reminded me we should have a fireproof copy." She nodded and went back inside. Didn't give it a second look. February 20th. I made my move, but not the one anyone would have expected. I didn't confront Megan. Didn't go to the police. Didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I drove to the south side of Ashland to a converted garage with a hand-painted sign that said Espinoza General Contracting, and I knocked on Victor Espinoza's door. Victor is 51, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that look like they've been arguing with concrete for 2 decades and winning. He's been in this business since I was in high school. Solid reputation. The kind of contractor who shows up when he says he will and charges what he quoted. He offered me coffee in a styrofoam cup. I sat on a folding chair between a table saw and a stack of lumber and kept my voice even. "Victor, I've been hearing from some of my clients that permit approvals have gotten really uneven at the county. Some contractors are sailing through in days. Others wait months. I pulled some public records and the numbers are pretty stark. Have you noticed anything?" I didn't mention Megan. Didn't mention the affair. Didn't even say Dwight's name. Victor set his coffee down so hard it splashed. He leaned forward with both hands on his knees, and for a second I thought he might cry or swear or both. "Noticed?" he said. "Garrett, I've been losing my mind over it for a year." He turned around and pulled a folder off a shelf behind him. Not a thin folder, a thick one. Dog-eared, coffee-stained, stuffed with printouts and handwritten notes. He'd been keeping records. "Look at this." He spread papers on his workbench. Rejection letters citing missing documentation. Resubmission requests for forms he'd already filed. Emails from the county with vague language about processing delays and application deficiencies. And next to each one, his own notes, dates, times, names of county employees he'd spoken to, word-for-word records of phone calls. "I submitted a permit for a garage build last April," he said. "Complete application, every box checked. I know because I had my secretary go through it twice. They kicked it back in 6 weeks for a missing site plan. Garrett, the site plan was page 3. I have the sent receipt from the email." He jabbed the paper with his finger. Meanwhile, Pollard breaks ground on a full commercial renovation 2 miles away. Permit approved in 8 days. 8 days. You explain that to me. "I thought about filing a complaint," he continued. 6 months ago, almost did. But you know how it works in a town like this. You go after the county and you lose, you'll never get another permit stamped. I got 4 guys who depend on me for a paycheck. I couldn't roll those dice. I let him talk. Let him get it out. Then I said, "What if you weren't alone?" He looked at me for a long time. Something changed in his face. The anger was still there, but now it had a shape, a direction. "Who else?" he said. "Let me make another visit. I'll be in touch." Brenda Tillman lived in a small house on the edge of town, a place with a tidy yard and a workshop in the back where she stored her tools. She was 48, ran a one-woman renovation outfit with a couple of subcontractors, and she was raising 2 kids on her own. Not the kind of person who takes risks for fun. She met me at her kitchen door, suspicious. I didn't blame her. A man you barely know showing up unannounced to talk about county permits. That smells like trouble. I kept it simple. Laid out the numbers on her kitchen table, same spreadsheet I'd built. Pollard's 13 permits in 9 days average. Her 2 permits in 51. The application she'd had to resubmit because the county lost it. She stared at the spreadsheet. Her jaw tightened the way metal tightens before it snaps. I lost a $22,000 bathroom remodel last year, she said quietly. Client wanted to go with me, liked my bid, liked my references, but my permit took 11 weeks. 11. He couldn't wait. Went with Pollard. Got approved in 8 days. She looked up at me. I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong with my applications. You weren't doing anything wrong. No. Her voice had an edge now. No, I wasn't. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. There's a woman, Jill Pratt. She used to work in development services at the county. Left about 7 months ago. Quit out of nowhere. I ran into her at the IGA last month, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, I left because I couldn't be part of what was happening in that office. If anyone ever actually investigates, tell them to call me. I felt the hair on my arm stand up the way it does when a circuit closes and the engine turns over. You have her number? Brenda scrolled through her phone and read it off to me. I wrote it on the back of a receipt. February 24th. I called Jill Pratt from my shop. She was nervous. I could hear it in the pauses between her words, the way she started sentences and then restarted them. She didn't want to meet in Ashland. Too small. Too many eyes. We met at a diner in Washburn, 15 minutes north, a place with vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Hon and didn't pay attention to who was sitting with who. Jill was in her mid-40s, wore reading glasses pushed up on her head, and held her coffee cup with both hands like it was keeping her warm from the inside. She'd worked directly with Megan for 3 years. I noticed it about a year ago, she said. Pollard's application started going to the top of the stack. Every time. Reviewed same day. Approved within a week. I asked Megan about it once. Casually, not accusing. She said Pollard's applications were always complete and well organized. She shook her head. But I'd seen his applications. Some of them were missing things. Incomplete site assessments, contractor license updates that were expired, stuff that would get any other applicant a rejection letter. And they went through anyway. Meanwhile, I watched complete applications from other contractors sit on her desk for weeks, and when she finally reviewed them, she'd find something to kick back. A missing signature on page 4. A date written in the wrong format. Stuff nobody had ever cared about before. Did you report it? To who? Megan was my direct supervisor. The department head above her is a political appointee. The kind of guy who keeps his head down and his pension growing. He doesn't want problems. I thought about going to the county board, but she trailed off. I have a state pension, Garrett. 21 years in. I wasn't going to blow that up on a hunch. So you quit. I quit. Told them I was burned out. Wanted to spend more time with my grandkids. Nobody asked questions. She took a sip of coffee. If an investigator comes asking, I'll talk. I'll tell them everything I just told you, but I won't file a complaint myself. I can't be the one who starts it. You won't have to be. I thanked her, paid for her coffee and mine. Walked out into the parking lot, where the wind off the lake cut through my jacket like it wasn't there. I got in my truck and pulled out onto Highway 2. About a mile past the Washburn city limits, where the road runs along the bluff above Superior, I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. I sat there for 10 minutes. I'm not going to tell you I cried because I didn't. But I'm not going to tell you I felt nothing either. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white and I felt the tendons in my forearms burn, and I let it come. All of it. 12 years, 2 kids. Saturday mornings making pancakes with Sophie on my hip and Tyler cracking eggs with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The way Megan used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movies. The way she'd say, "Drive safe" every morning when I left for the shop, and I'd say, "Fix something," because it was our stupid joke and it never stopped being funny. She'd thrown it away. Not even for a man who loved her. For a man who used her as a business tool. Dwight Pollard didn't want my wife. He wanted her stamp of approval, and she came attached. I sat with that for 10 minutes, felt every bit of it. Let it burn. Then I started the truck, pulled back on the highway, and drove home. Because I had work to do. February 25th. I drove to Superior, across the bridge, out of the county, away from anyone who might recognize my truck in a parking lot. I met with a divorce attorney named Ellen Briggs. Sharp woman. Late 50s, gray hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain, and a handshake that told you she'd been winning fights for a long time. A buddy from my unit had used her for his divorce and said she was the best he'd seen. I laid everything out. The affair, the permits, the public records, Victor, Brenda, Jill, Northern Birch Holdings. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she took off her glasses, cleaned them on her blazer, and put them back on. "Wisconsin is no fault," she said. "The affair by itself doesn't change asset division, but if your wife's conduct constitutes financial misconduct, enriching a romantic partner through abuse of her public office, that can be considered. And if she's facing criminal liability," she paused. "Misconduct in public office. It's a Class 1 felony, up to 3.5 years. I know. She'll be fighting on 2 fronts if a criminal investigation is open when you file. That changes her leverage considerably. My advice, don't file yet. Let the complaint process start. Once she's under scrutiny from the DA's office, then you file. She won't have the bandwidth to fight you on terms." She was right. I knew she was right because it was exactly how I'd have approached a complicated repair. Fix the underlying problem before you start reassembling the machine. But she warned me about something I hadn't thought through. If your wife suspects you're the one who triggered the investigation, she could claim harassment or retaliation in the divorce. Small town, family court judge probably knows both of you. Your fingerprints can't be on the complaint, Garrett. It has to come from the contractors, from Victor and Brenda. You're not in this. You're just a husband who didn't know. Understood. One more thing. She leaned forward. Don't confront her. Don't hint. Don't change your behavior at home in any way she could interpret as suspicious. You keep making pancakes and coaching hockey until I tell you it's time. Can you do that? I'd spent 12 months in Fallujah pretending every doorway wasn't a potential last breath. I could handle breakfast with a woman who was cheating on me. Yeah, I said. I can do that. March 1st. Victor Espinoza walked into the Bayfield County District Attorney's office and filed a formal complaint requesting an audit of the Development Services Division's permit approval process. The complaint cited statistical disparity in approval times across contractors, a pattern of rejected applications from multiple firms, and disproportionate permit volume for a single company. Every fact cited came from public records. Nothing traceable to insider information, nothing that pointed to a disgruntled husband. Brenda Tillman filed a supporting complaint 3 days later. Ray Colvin, the DA, was old school. 55, cautious, the kind of prosecutor who wouldn't chase a jaywalker without 2 witnesses and a traffic camera. But he was also honest, which was the whole point. He assigned a staff investigator to run a preliminary review. And then, because this is a small town and small towns leak like screen doors, someone in the DA's office mentioned the complaint to someone at the courthouse, who mentioned it to someone else, and within 48 hours the word had traveled down the line like a spark on a fuse until it reached Dwight Pollard. I knew it had reached him because of what happened on Wednesday night, March 5th. I was in the living room watching the end of a hockey game. Tyler was already in bed. Sophie was reading on the couch next to me, fighting sleep the way 8-year-olds do, like staying awake is a competitive sport. Megan had gone upstairs to take a bath. At 10 o'clock, I went up to check on Sophie's room. She'd wandered up on her own. And I heard Megan's voice behind the bathroom door. Low. Tight. The kind of voice you use when you're not arguing, but you wanna be. I stood in the hallway and listened. Not to the words, the door muffled most of them. But I could hear the rhythm. Question, pause, sharp response, longer pause, something that sounded like a plea. She came out 20 minutes later looking like someone had drained the color out of her face. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't been crying. It was more like the redness you get when you hold your breath too long. "Everything okay?" I said from the bedroom. "Fine. Just work stuff. This audit thing. The DA's office is poking around. Everyone's stressed." "That sounds annoying." "Yeah." She got into bed and turned off her light. Didn't say goodnight. The next morning she snapped at Tyler for leaving his hockey bag in the hallway, burned the coffee, slammed a cabinet door hard enough to rattle the dishes inside. I watched all of it from behind my cereal bowl and said nothing. What I didn't know yet, but found out later, was what Dwight had actually said to her on that phone call. He didn't call to strategize. He didn't call to protect her. He called to blame her. He told her she must have been sloppy with the paperwork. He told her that if this went sideways, she was the one with the government job, the one whose name was on every approval stamp, the one who'd face charges. He was just a contractor who applied for permits. He didn't force anyone to approve them. It was the first time Megan understood what Dwight actually was. Not a man who loved her. Not a partner. A man who'd positioned her between himself and the blast and was backing away. But by then she was in too deep to pull away. Too deep to admit what she'd done. So she stayed in the lie the way a bad swimmer stays in deep water, thrashing, sinking, pretending she's fine. The next 2 weeks were a slow erosion. The county investigators started pulling records, interviewing staff. The atmosphere in development services shifted. Megan told me people were whispering, closing doors, being careful about what they put in emails. She described it as political nonsense, but her voice was thinner each time she mentioned it. The Wednesday late nights stopped. She started coming home on time, sometimes early. Started being present with the kids in a way she hadn't been in months, helping Sophie with art projects, showing up to Tyler's practices, asking them about their days with a kind of focused attention that felt almost aggressive. It wasn't a mother reconnecting. It was a woman building a record. I'd seen this before, in a different context, in a different country. Men who knew the inspector was coming, suddenly polishing equipment that had been rusted for months. It's not maintenance. It's theater. One evening, middle of March, Megan opened a bottle of wine after the kids went to bed. Not unusual on a weekend, but this was a Tuesday. She poured a glass, then another, And then she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, almost offhand, Garrett, if I ever got in trouble at work, like a policy thing or an HR issue, you'd stand by me, right? We're a team? I looked at her for a long time. She held her glass with both hands. Her fingernails were bitten short, a habit she'd kicked years ago. It was back. Depends on what you did, I said. She laughed. High and quick, the kind of laugh that's got nothing to do with anything being funny. Change the subject to Tyler's science fair project. But when she reached for her glass, her hand shook, and the wine caught the kitchen light and trembled. 2 days later, I was back in Ellen Briggs's office. The investigator requested records going back 18 months, she said. That's not a casual review. That's a full-scale audit. They're looking for a pattern, and they're going to find one because the pattern's there. So it's time. Almost. My paralegal found something else. She slid a printed page across her desk. Your Mystery LLC, Northern Birch Holdings. It was formed in Wisconsin, but the registered agent is a Minnesota law firm. Minnesota requires disclosure of LLC members in operating agreements filed with the state. We pulled the Minnesota filing. I already knew. Before she said it, I already knew. But hearing it was different from knowing it. 2 members, Ellen said. Dwight Pollard and Megan Harlan. My wife co-owned a lakefront cabin with the man she was sleeping with. A cabin being renovated by his company under a permit she'd fast-tracked through her own office, funded by profits from a business she'd inflated by kneecapping his competition. Ellen watched my face. I don't know what she saw there, but she waited a beat before continuing. This is your leverage, she said. If she doesn't agree to your terms, the LLC documentation goes to the DA as evidence of financial benefit from misconduct in office. That's not just losing a job. That's felony territory. Draw up the papers, I said. Saturday, March 15th. I woke up at 5:30, lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the house. Sophie breathing through the baby monitor we still kept on for no real reason. The furnace cycling. Wind against the windows. I got up, made pancakes. The real kind. From scratch, buttermilk, the recipe my mother taught me. Tyler came down first, still half asleep, hair going in 6 directions. Sophie followed, carrying a stuffed dog by one ear. We ate breakfast together. They told me about a kid at school who'd brought a lizard to class. Sophie wanted a lizard now. Tyler said lizards were boring and she should want a snake. I said we'd think about it, which is what parents say when the answer is no, but they don't want to ruin breakfast. I drove them to Megan's mother's house. It was a pre-arranged visit for the weekend, had been on the calendar for a month. Her mother waved from the porch. I waved back, hugged my kids, told them I loved them, watched them go inside. Then I drove home. Megan was at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and her phone, scrolling something. She looked up when I came in and smiled, the automatic smile, the one that runs on habit, not feeling. I sat down across from her and placed a manila envelope on the table. She stared at it the way you stare at a sound in the middle of the night. Not sure yet if it's dangerous, but knowing it's not normal. What is this? Open it. She did. I watched her read the first page. The smile was gone. The color left her face in stages, like watching a sunset in reverse. Warmth, then gray, then nothing. Garrett, I know about Dwight. She opened her mouth, closed it. I've known for weeks, I said. I kept my voice level. Not cold, just steady. The way you talk when you're reading a gauge and the numbers matter. I know about the Wednesday nights. I know about the permits, how his applications go through in a week while Victor Espinoza and Brenda Tillman wait 2 months for theirs. I know about Northern Birch Holdings, the LLC you co-own with him, the cabin on Madeline Island. Each sentence hit her like a separate weight. I could see it in her posture, the slight collapse, the way her shoulders drew inward. I know a former employee of your department is willing to testify about how applications were handled in that office. And I know the DA has already opened an audit of your division. Garrett, please, let me finish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to read those papers. The terms are fair, more than fair, given what I could do with what I have. You keep your pension, you keep your retirement. We tell people it didn't work out. The kids don't hear details until they're old enough to understand them. She was gripping the papers so hard the edges were crumpling. Or you fight me. And if you fight me, I hand everything. The LLC documents, the permit data, the witness statements, to the DA and to every news outlet in the Chequamegon Bay area. You won't just lose the divorce. You'll lose your career, your professional standing, maybe your freedom. Misconduct in public office, Class 1 felony, up to 3.5 years. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway. I'm not negotiating, Megan. Sign or don't, but decide by Monday. She stared at the table for a long time. When she looked up, I expected tears. I expected anger. I expected the version of her I'd lived with for 12 years to come roaring out with explanations and justifications and the kind of emotional artillery that usually sends me retreating to the shop. What I saw instead was fear. Clean, bare, undiluted fear. And beneath it, something worse. The look of someone who understands, completely and for the first time, that every exit is sealed. She tried one thing. The kids need their mother, she said. Her voice was unsteady. No judge will take them away from me. Primary custody, not full. You'll see them every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. That's standard for the non-custodial parent in this state. And given that you may be under criminal investigation by the time we see a judge, any family court in Wisconsin will call that arrangement reasonable. I paused. Ellen Briggs agrees. I watched the name register. Not a bluff. Not a threat made in anger at 2 a.m. A real attorney, already retained, already briefed. Megan's chin dipped. Just slightly. The fight going out of her like air from a tire. Then, quietly. You're the one who got Victor to file the complaint. Victor filed the complaint because your boyfriend spent a year stealing his livelihood. I didn't make him do anything. I just told him he wasn't alone. She flinched at the word boyfriend. A small flinch, barely visible, but I caught it. I didn't do this to you, Megan, I said. You did this to yourself. I'm just the one cleaning it up. I got up from the table, went to the shop, worked on a brake drum for a snowplow for 3 hours. Didn't turn on the radio, just the sound of tools on metal and my own breathing. She didn't sign that day. She took the papers to her own lawyer. She had 48 hours under the agreement. Her lawyer told her what Ellen had told me. The terms were aggressive but survivable. Fighting them risked everything. She signed on Monday, March the 17th. After that, things moved the way water moves once the dam cracks. Not all at once, but steady, and in one direction. Megan moved out the following week. Rented a small apartment in Washburn. Told friends it was a trial separation, and I didn't contradict the story. That wasn't generosity. It was strategy. The non-disparagement clause cut both ways, and I didn't need the town talking any more than it already was. The DA's audit escalated. What started as a preliminary review became a full investigation. Megan was named as a subject. Not publicly, not yet, but the investigators were in her office going through files, interviewing colleagues. She hired a criminal defense attorney. Smart move. Probably the smartest thing she'd done in a year. The attorney's advice was straightforward. Cooperate. Provide information about the arrangement with Dwight. Hand over text messages, emails, anything that showed he pressured her. Position herself not as a co-conspirator, but as someone who'd been manipulated by a controlling figure. I don't know if that story is true. I don't know if Dwight pushed her into it, or if she walked in with her eyes open. Probably some of both. It doesn't matter to me anymore. The math on our marriage was done. But as a legal strategy, it was sound. And Megan was always good at figuring out which way the wind was blowing. Dwight Pollard, on the other hand, Dwight didn't have a wind to blow toward. The DA opened a separate investigation into Pollard Construction's bidding practices. 3 of his active projects were frozen pending permit review. 2 clients pulled their contracts and moved to Victor Espinoza, which was the kind of poetic justice I hadn't planned but didn't mind watching. Dwight's bonding company suspended his surety bond. And without bonding, a commercial contractor is dead in the water. No new jobs, no new bids, no new revenue. I heard through the grapevine that he put the silver ram up for sale. Saw it on Facebook Marketplace one evening, $42,000. Like new, which it almost was, because I'd rebuilt the guts of it with my own hands 2 years ago. I didn't bid. I drove past the Madeline Island ferry dock one afternoon in late March. You could see the island from the road, and if you knew where to look, you could see the roofline of the cabin. The renovation had stopped. The framing was up, half the roof was shingled, and a blue tarp flapped over the unfinished side, snapping in the wind off Superior. No crew, no trucks. Just a half-built house that nobody was ever going to live in, going still against the sky like a sentence someone started and never finished. March 29th, last Saturday of ice fishing season. The bay was still holding, but the ice had that soft gray look it gets when it's thinking about giving up. Another week, and it'd be too dangerous. The season closes when the season closes. You don't argue with a lake. I drove out at 5:30 in the morning, the way I always do. When I got to the shack, 3 trucks were already there. Travis's F-250 parked at its usual angle, like he'd pulled in without thinking and hit it exactly right. Craig's Silverado, Neil's Tacoma. I opened the plywood door. They were all inside. Travis had brought a new propane heater. The old one had been giving off a smell since January. Craig had a bag of venison jerky from a buck he'd taken in November. Neil was sitting in his chair with a cup of coffee, looking at the hole in the ice. Nobody said anything about the last 2 months. There was no speech about brotherhood, no apology, no tearful moment where someone grabs someone else's shoulder and says something meaningful. That's not how it works. Not with us. Travis looked up. Thought we'd try for some perch today. Sounds good. Neil handed me a coffee. Craig adjusted the heater. I sat down in my chair, the chair that had been empty for too many Saturdays, and dropped my line in the water. We fished until noon and didn't catch a thing. It was the best Saturday I'd had in months.